Hello, Legendary listeners, and welcome to the Legendary Ladies Podcast, a show hosted by three millennials sharing entertaining and thoughtful conversations about media, pop culture, and storytelling in all its forms. This week, we have a very special podcast for you. As a lot of our listeners know, this podcast covered the Legends of Tomorrow TV show for over 7 years, and we've been privileged to get to know a number of the writers and creatives from that show over that time period, in addition to all the amazing fans that have been with us since the start. In support and solidarity with those writers and the Writers Guild of America, we actually reached out to see if any writers from the WGA wanted to step in and talk a little bit about the potential writers' strike and what the writers' strike with the WGA could mean for the television community, not only just the industry in general, but also what it can mean for the people within that industry. So we have two individuals who are joining us tonight as guests. The first is Ray Utarnachitt. Did I say that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Success! And Christina Walker, both who are veteran writers from the CW and other networks. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. So, Ray, you have known us for a while.
Yes.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us where we've seen your writing.
Obviously the most recent thing you would have seen was the last season of Legends of Tomorrow, which, was unceremoniously canceled by the CW. And I was on that for 7 seasons. So that's probably where you would have seen me the most. But before that, I did write for Flash and Supergirl, did episodes for them, and a show called The Tomorrow People, also with Berlanti Productions, and then before that I wrote on a show called Person of Interest. So if you've seen that show, I wrote it for that for a little bit. But yeah, that's so. But yeah, probably that's the most recent thing you would have seen is Legends of Tomorrow. So.
And Christina, where can people find your wonderful work?
I was fortunate to get hired right as the pandemic was coming down. I literally started the Monday after the stay-at-home order went into effect. My offer went out the day the stay-at-home order went into effect, and I'm like, and we want you to start on Monday. And I was like, okay, as I wait in the grocery line for 2 hours. And that was for the wonderful show called The Flash, little show. You might have heard of it. I was on season 7 and 8, and unfortunately wasn't able to finish out the show. Very sad that this is where it's like part of what we're talking about with the Guild and the possibility of the strike all has to do with great shows like both Flash and Legends, like just kind of going away. And before that, I was on a little show called October Faction on Netflix, and prior to that, Salvation on CBS. And then a little unknown, sometimes known period piece on ABC called Still Star-Crossed, about what happened in Fair Verona after Romeo and Juliet are found dead.
I vaguely remember that one.
I do too. Morgan and I would 100% be the people that would remember that.
Yes.
Kat, not so much.
I did this ABC program, so I got to do that show as my program year. And I remember that was at the top of my list. I was like, I know this is probably not going to go, but this is like the show that I like kind of was made for, because I just feel like sci-fi genre stuff for me feeds that same muscle and joy and like that part of my palate that loves historical fiction as well. And so like when I was like, oh my gosh, it's about the women though, it's not just about the dudes, I so want to do that show. And then when they were like, it's going to go, I was like, oh, can I please? And they're like, nobody's in New York. I was like, I will go to New York.
Right. I will move. Yeah.
Yeah, I will move to New York. And so I got to live in New York for 9 months, and we shot in Spain. And it was like one of those first jobs that I tell people, I was like, so this is an anomaly. Don't, this will probably never happen again. I don't even know how it happened to me, but I just kind of rode that train. Ironically, I just had dinner with one of the writers from that show. But because we all picked up and moved to New York, it was kind of like, yeah, you just kind of bond when you start in LA for a couple weeks and then move across the country and then shoot in Spain.
And as people who live in the New York area and Amy living in the California area, we always talk about how different the cultures of New York and California are. So I could only imagine like what that move was like.
Well, I'd been to New York a couple of times. So, and then 2 of our writers had actually lived there. So that, I mean, the showrunner was from there. And so between that and just the time difference and being able to hop on a plane and go into Spain if we needed to for production, it just made sense to move it to New York. But like actually living in New York and like being able to walk, like our offices were in Chelsea. Or no, in Soho, sorry. Our offices were in Soho. And so my friend was like, make sure you can walk to work because the trains aren't always reliable. So I lived in the West Village, and it was just kind of like, I got to live in the West Village.
That's a cool area too.
Yeah, it's
amazing.
It was a neat experience. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to kind of dive into the nitty-gritties to start and give our listeners an overview. So let's start with the basics. What is the WGA? Who can join? You 2 mentioned before that you are captains. Is that correct? Guild captains? What does that mean? So how is the WGA laid out?
Well, I mean, I'll give the overview, and then Christina, you can talk about the captains. I mean, the Writers Guild of America is the, essentially the bargaining union for writers for the screen and television, and their jurisdiction covers all of that. And and starting in 2007, it started covering jurisdiction over the internet. Thankfully, because if that hadn't happened, everything that you see on Netflix and all the streaming services would not have been covered. And so it's actually a union that started way back in 1933, I believe. And it's been going strong ever since. They're really it's a union that really I think their goal is to really, really protect working conditions and minimums. Really is what it is. It's like protecting like the sort of floor, the absolute minimum we can be paid as far as when we start working for the studios, and we also thankfully get health coverage out of it too, since the studios help pay into that. And I guess Christina can expand that into what the captain's program is at the Writers Guild.
So so for me and Ray, both were captains. And that just kind of means like we're on a touch with on a regular basis with our coordinator through the guild. So like each captain has kind of like a person who is their conduit to the board. The board is like the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And they are like the heads of, at least for us out here, the Writers Guild West. And then there's a Writers Guild East, and they have board members as well. And then for what you were talking about in regards to the, it's called the MBA, and that is negotiated by a negotiating committee. And usually that entails not just the members of the board, but also members who are members of the guild, who are usually also part of the larger kind of echelon of the Writers Guild. And there are some captains on there. You don't necessarily have to be a captain if you're also part of the negotiating committee. And by the way, all the people who are part of the negotiating committee, as well as captains, like we don't get paid extra. We don't get like little like perks or anything. It's all volunteer. Like we are doing our time.
You're a rep.
To, like go to extra meetings, to like do out extra emails. And so like each captain has regular guild members that we then communicate with what we're finding out from the guild. And so like if a member has a question, they can email usually most of the people on the board directly, or they can ask us and we can find that answer out for them.
Right. Yeah, to put it in like the crudest terms in a way, it's like, and this is what it sounds like, right? We're captains, like we're like captains, and then we have people who like we give information to who are like kind of below us. So like we hear from like the generals, right, who are like the leadership, and then they're like, tell everybody this, and then Christina are like, all right, we give each other thumbs up, and then we literally tell everyone on our team, however many people you have, like this is what we're being told from the leadership. And I think at the last meeting, I think there were 360 captains. Is what I think I heard is a pretty high number, and then each captain, has anywhere from like 5 to 50 members on their team, and so I do think the success of the captain's program is one of the big reasons why the guild is able to get information out super quickly and to keep everyone very unified, because everyone understands very clearly what the goals are. And like what Christina said, our team members can talk to us. So for example, if you're a guild member and you have a question about, I don't even know how to fill out my dues form, or like a question about health insurance, like you could go to the guild website and there's an 800 number, or there's a general email, or you could talk to your captain like Christina or like me, and you're like, hey, Ray, I've got this question. Can you help me figure it out? And it is our duty to, if we don't already know the answer, to go seek out the answer and help them with that. So it's a very personal connection to the guild, which I think is super, especially during contract negotiation times, is super helpful to get information out and feel connected to the union.
About how many members are part of the WGA?
Gosh, I'm not really sure. I do know that I think the number of people who voted was for the strike authorization, which is probably a good estimate of like the active members in the guild. It was like 9,000 something, right?
Yeah.
And
Christina,
that was only
it was
like 74% of membership. So that means like 25%. So if I had to guess based on that average, I would say like
13.
Yeah, 13,
14,000.
12,
right.
Yeah, somewhere between
13,000
members.
Wow.
But like I remember when I first entered the guild, you get a little thing and they like tell you like there are more people who entered the NBA, Major League Baseball, than entered the guild. Like there are more new members in like professional
baseball
right? than members people that actually make it into the guild.
So is this the kind of thing where every television writer is a guild member, or is this something that you work your way into? I know that's a very complicated question.
Yeah. So both Ray and I we were support staff. And so I do think there are a number of members who are support staff who belong to IATSE who like get a script or get half a script, and you have to earn points to become a member in the guild.
Right. It's a point system.
Both Ray and I did a program. I did the Disney ABC program. He did the Warner Brothers program. And that helped us get staffed. Once you get staffed on a show, you will accumulate enough points that year to join the guild. And so I'd say the majority of staffed credits that you see are members of the guild, but then you do have a small percentage who are support staff who have gotten a credit.
Right.
Or half a credit and are working towards that guild membership.
Right. And and in the United States, I mean, the animation is also, they're in a different union, which is IATSE and Local 839. And so that's a whole complicated thing too, because you ask yourself like, well, they also write for the screen. Why are they not also included in the Writers Guild? And that's a whole other issue that's sort of
spend a whole evening.
Right. But there are members who do 839 IATSE 839 work and WGA work too. So you can be a member of both unions and do it. It's just they cover the different areas, the different unions. Yeah.
Now, I think we should dive into kind of the big question for people that don't understand. Why is there a strike?
Well, not yet.
Not technically, not yet.
Or almost going
might
to be a strike.
There be a
Exactly.
strike?
Why?
The hope is that there is no strike. The hope is that everything works out great. That is the hope.
Exactly. Let's actually backtrack a little bit. What was the vote about for people, and why is there a possibility to a strike?
Well, I don't know. Do you want to?
I was going to say, like, I feel like we could take it in parts, right? How does that sound? So I'll explain the strike authorization vote, because the strike authorization vote makes it seem like we're striking. And that's kind of part of the complicated whole system of how it functions. A strike authorization vote merely authorizes the negotiating committee to strike if they cannot come to an agreement or a compromise with the studios, also known as the AMPTP, by May 1st, which is when our contract with them expires. And just because we approve a strike authorization does not mean we're actually going to strike. in 2017, which was the very first time I had a chance to vote, and
that.
had no idea what was going on. Like, I feel like you
Right.
guys are now far more educated than I was back then. But we voted to strike. It was like a 96.3 approval to strike. They had a yes authorization vote, and there were fewer members who voted on that. And the midnight before May 1st, the compromise was made. We did not strike. I remember my script was due that weekend.
Wow.
It was crazy. And
it's
we
crazy.
didn't. And that's why it's like, I wish it wasn't called a strike authorization vote, kind of, because it does seem like we're taking a step forward versus being like, our whole union is here, not just the negotiating committee. The union is behind us. And by the union, I mean the guild membership.
Right.
And, you know, we've gone through a lot in the last, like, you know, in 2020, the last big membership meeting I was at was the one where they were like, oh, we really need better residuals. We might have to strike. And they had like a whole presentation.
They had everything. Yeah.
Went out the window when the pandemic happened. And so a compromise was made so that, again, everyone could keep working, because writers were one of the few groups that could work amidst the pandemic, because we could all Zoom from home. What is Zooming? I had no idea.
We all wish we'd known and invested in Zoom.
I mean, technology, thank goodness. But that's to just explain the strike authorization vote in a nutshell. Just because we vote to strike doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be one. And in fact, the stronger the vote, usually that gives the negotiating committee at least more leverage than they had before, when it might have been in question of how united the union and the guild was. Because now there was no question. You have more than 50% of the guild voted, and we voted in favor of a strike authorization vote.
Right. Yeah. I think I mean, that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think like, you know, and I've said this before to my team and other people, where like really the greatest strength that the guild has when we go into these negotiations is, number one, the strike authorization, because that basically just means like, we're going to do it. You know, if you force us to do it, we're going to do it. Right. It's basically what it is. And it's it is a threat. It is a threat that like, and everyone is on board, like, or like 97.85%, I think, is what voted yes. And so, you know, for example, if you go into negotiations and you have a low percentage, which has happened in the past, apparently, you know, like it's 40%, 50%, like then the AMPTP is like, well, you know, half your membership doesn't want to strike. So
there's no incentive.
Like, we don't have, there's no incentive to like bargain in good faith. There's no incentive to like really work towards a good deal. But if you come in and say like, okay, most of us, except for like, I think it was like 185 people, right, or something. Then
198. I actually
198 voted no.
I looked it up earlier too. I was like, I think it was a very small amount of people.
It was 0.15%.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go in there, you're like, we're like, most of us are ready to go and walk. I mean, that really kind of gives you a lot of strength. And then of course, the deadline is the next sort of thing we have, where, you know, if we are ready to walk, you know, if we're ready to, no extensions. I know we get a lot, as a captain, I get a lot of team members are like, couldn't we extend, like, you know, if we're all getting along during negotiations, couldn't we extend the deadline and keep working? And it's like, no, because like, that's it. Like, we walk that date, that's the strike authorization, and that's it. Yeah. So I really like, you know, like Christina was saying, I think number one, the strike authorization gives us that strength and unity, and number two, it is the ability to walk and withhold our work at the deadline, are the two greatest strengths we have in the negotiation.
Yeah, I think it would be great for our listeners, especially, to know, like, what is it that the WGA wants, and then also, I mean, how has streaming changed sort of the name of the game?
You guys are like, hold on.
You mentioned earlier, you know, you actually mentioned earlier the 2007 writer's strike, which I am dating myself a little bit, but I lived through, because I was an intern at the time on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart.
Wow.
So everything old is new again. But I remember at the time, I think my understanding of it was that they were striking about digital. And you mentioned that, like, if they hadn't won there, you might not even have any, you know, anything in the streaming wars. So I think that's really interesting and crazy, because I don't know that I necessarily think of streaming as digital, and I don't think a lot of people do.
Yeah, they coined the term new media.
New media. Which, probably made
Sounds
sense
right.
at a certain point in time. But now it's just media, guys. Like, you are the media. And I mean, like, honestly, to put it in like the simplest of terms, is that, show budgets have exploded. Like, like you just look at Lord of the Rings, you look at any of the Game of Thrones shows, you look at any of their budgets on Netflix. I mean, the budgets have exploded, and the streamers are making a lot of money, and writers' pay has gone down, which is really what we are fighting against. So, I think if anyone is listening and just wants to get a general sense of it, it is like the budget. They're spending more monies on these shows. They're earning a lot more money. All the streamers. And the fact that the people who create the content that is making these companies all their money, we are actually getting paid less and less as the years go on. So that's sort of the general scope of things. That is real. And the rise of streaming is like sort of like, let's face it, it really is the main culprit. I mean, I know broadcast television. I think it's hard to tell, but it sounds like, I don't, when I was, because Legends of Tomorrow was a broadcast television show, it felt like it was still kind of like moving along the way it used to. Like, you would have you would have your normal length of time in a writer's room. You would actually get to produce your episodes. And, they compensated you pretty fairly. I mean, the way they did. I mean, it wasn't too much. It was, we felt it was fair for the work we were doing. And I think it wasn't until really, Netflix came along and kind of subverted all the ways they were paying writers and how they made shows, and really took advantage of a lot of loopholes that has ended up, years later, decimating the way we make a living. And that's really what's hard. And I think all we really want is some version of what we kind of used to have. I mean, that's really, if you looked at the pattern of demands and read about them, and if you look down the list, you're like, oh, this is like stuff that was kind of standard that we used to, like, you actually hire writers, actually hire a writing staff. Which has been, that number has been cut down, of the number of writers in a room, and actually try to get writers to work all the way through production is also one of our demands, which is something that has been taken away. And a lot of that really is because of the streaming model, the way they create their shows and the way they actually produce their shows. So that's basically what we're fighting for. And
just to extrapolate a little bit on that, for streaming shows, a lot of times they'll bank all the scripts ahead of time. And so unless you're, say, like a co-EP or an EP, like an upper level writer, then you stay on for the life of the show. But if you're a lower level writer, like a staff writer or story editor, even possibly a executive story editor or co-producer, you don't have a longer enough contract to actually not only stay on for the length of the room, but stay on for production. And the kind of network model that Ray was kind of talking about, even on Legends of Tomorrow and on The Flash, it's like the room starts early. The room always starts early before production, a couple months before production. So we usually have a number of scripts to start shooting so that they can start prepping and shooting those scripts. And then once production starts, the train is going. And once that train is going, we have to keep, and by we I mean writers, have to keep giving production scripts, and then they hand it off to post-production. And then once things start airing, that window of when we hand a script versus when it sees airs gets smaller and smaller until usually Christmas time. We are able, there's usually a break in broadcast. We can get ahead and get back up so that window is a little bit bigger on the other side of the break. And then when we come back again, that window gets smaller and smaller until the season's done. Right.
Yeah.
And for the streaming model, it's not that, because they usually, like on Netflix, everything drops at once, which means you have to be done with everything before they premiered it. Right. So that means, like, I worked on a Netflix show. We were done the fall of 2019. That show did not air, or I should say I was done fall of 2019. That show did not premiere on Netflix until I think like March or April of 2019. So like 5 months later.
Oh, wow.
And so I got lucky that I got to actually go up to Toronto to actually produce my episode. And we did a thing called cross-boarding. And it's what a lot of streamers do to save money, especially if you're shooting internationally, is they'll shoot 2 episodes simultaneously. And it saves a lot on budget, because especially if like you get a guest star, that guest star can now be in 2 episodes, and really they'll only were up there for wherever you're shooting for a week. And so all of that experience that I was able to bank because I had a showrunner who understood and really fought for their lower level writers to be able to go to set to gain that education, that's not happening anymore.
Right.
And so you have, like, I've literally met 2 supervising producers who have been on nothing but streamers and this other thing called mini rooms, but we're going to get to that.
That's a lot of things, yeah.
They've only been to set once. And they're supervising producers. Like the next level up is co-EP. You then are there usually for the life of the show if you're a co-EP. Right. And it's like, as a supervising producer, you are expected to know almost all of production because you're 2 steps away from being an executive producer, aka possibly a showrunner.
Right. And theoretically running the show. Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, like, you know, if you listen to what Christina is saying when she describes the broadcast model, I mean, that's really where the problems start, is like the old school way, broadcast television, the major networks, including the CW, like you were kind of writing and shooting the show at the same time, right? So there was a deadline you had to hit, and the writers needed to be there to sort of like finish all that stuff out, and they kind of needed the warm bodies, right, in order to do all that work in a very specific amount of time, because there was a premiere date, right? There was a premiere date in the fall that you had to make. Now, what happens in streaming is like there's no premiere date anymore, right? So you have a completely different way. So you can you can imagine the Netflix execs, they're like, now we can take our time, So let's you know what? We don't have to hire 12 writers to start the room. Let's hire 1 writer, a showrunner, and let's have them write the first 2 episodes. And then they're like, oh, okay. So then because there's no deadline, they don't have to hit a fall premiere date. Someone from, they got their great Netflix show, they sold the pilot. Now that showrunner's like alone has to now write 2 episodes, and the writer's going to do it because they want their show to be on Netflix, right? So they squeeze that showrunner for all that time and money, and then they're like, okay, you know what, we like this, so let's pay for maybe 3 or 4 more episodes and throw them a little money for maybe 2 more writers. And then so then that showrunner is like, oh, thank you, Mr. Netflix. And so now that writer hires 2 more writers now, and to write like 4 episodes total. Now you can see, like, there's, compared to the broadcast model where we had 12 writers working right at the start date of the writer's room, you're trickling in writers, and you're not even in production yet. You're just like trying to figure out if they like the show, honestly. And that's sort of how the mini room started, right? I mean, it was just like, let's just get a little room together and just see if, you flirt with the show. You're like, I kind of like this idea, but like, let's pay the least amount of writers, the least amount of money, just to see if we actually like this thing. And then once they do like it, guess what? You've already written like 6 or 7 episodes, half the show, or maybe the show's only 8 episodes, right, on Netflix. And guess what? You saved all that money, Mr. Netflix, because you only paid 3 writers instead of 8 writers or whatever it is, and squeeze those writers for all their time and energy. And then when you go into production, you realize, oh, actually, I don't need like a full staff of writers. I just need 1 person to like escort the show all the way through production. And it's usually the showrunner, who at that point is like overworked, underpaid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so you can see how, like, yes, this creates like a lot of content, but now you've only hired half the amount of writers you used to hire. And that writer, 1 or 2 writers, are working for a year and a half on 1 show this entire time, and everyone else is left scrambling for like scraps that are left, right? So does that sound right? Accurate, Christina? I mean, yes. I feel like I'm getting on a tangent. I'm getting very angry here, but
I was going to say, yes, and the 1 or 2 writers that other showrunner usually hires are co-EPs or another EP, because they need someone who as I was talking about earlier, is very familiar with post-production and production. Sometimes they're hired because, like, I have a friend who's a upper level writer. but he used to be an actor. So he's like really great with actors. So he'll spend months on set because he can actually put out fires because he has the authority, because he's an upper level writer and because he's an actor. Like, actors love him. And so the showrunner now can send that writer to set versus going on their own and know that set.
And they've done it before, right? They have the experience. That's
they have the
important
experience. And for him in particular, because he used to be an actor, he understands the acting side of things as well. And so he's been on a lot of shows where there's like that one big name actor, possibly number one on the call sheet, who can be a bit of a drama queen or king. And that friend of mine is known to be able to put out those fires and get the person on set and get the words said so that you can actually make your day. And, you know, but you're only hiring one or two of them. And thank goodness, yay, Ray is now one or two of those people. But I'm a mid-level writer. I'm lucky if there's one of me on a show. And I'm also a writer of color who loves to write genre. And I haven't worked in a year.
Yeah, I was going to ask what that does for like pipeline. Like, what does it do for the young writers coming
well,
up?
There you go.
It feels like it's completely limiting any growth within the area, as well as creatively. Like, if you have three people,
say chemistry-wise, because the whole point of the room is that you get to know each other. You get to, you know, talk about what you're going to have for lunch. And like, how does that affect? Well, I mean, look, that's a big part of the writing too.
Big question.
It's a big part of Kat's writing process for sure.
What is lunch?
Dude, but nectar of the gods, my friends.
But yeah, and that's taken away kind of, because then you don't have as many people to interact with. I know a lot of part of getting your next job is actually interacting with other writers within that room. So if you don't have anyone to interact with, you don't get that next job. So, and then do you feel like the story of the show is affected when you don't have chemistry between writers, because they hardly, you know, there's less of them, or they're not interacting with each other as much?
I mean, this is where, if you know that showrunner, usually they're hiring people they know and they've worked with, because again, it's crunch time. They can't possibly bring in someone who they don't know, who might not like write the punch the same way they write the punch, or like, I think writers do get to have a shorthand. Like, I feel very fortunate. Like, I've known Ray now for like 10 years.
Right.
But I feel like Ray and I, even though we've never worked together, I feel like we could, because we've known each other for 10 years. And these showrunners are hiring people they know, understandably, because they have a very tight crunch.
Right.
Yeah.
It means that unless you know the showrunner and are an upper level writer, you're not probably going to get the job. Even if you get the interview, even if you have an amazing interview, you probably won't get the job.
Right, because you only have now, you know, think about it, you only have spots to hire 2 writers now, you know, instead of 8 to 10 or whatever it was in the past. And you're not going to take a chance on someone you don't know, quite frankly. You know, and even at my level, you know, when there were shows that used to have, you know, 4 co-EPs, now there's only 1 co-EP slot. So like, everyone is being cut out of the process. And Kat, like, the pipeline thing is a huge problem. And I think, you know, Christina was sort of mentioned that earlier, when writers can't go to set and they can't learn how to make a TV show, how to produce a TV show, apart from the writing, because that writing is a huge part of it. But, you know, the other part of it is actually making the show and dealing with crew and dealing with actors. I mean, that pipeline is now broken and completely shattered. And so, you know, the whole thing is kind of falling apart. And that's sort of what we're fighting against. We're trying to, like, you know, maintain some sort of semblance. Look, we understand that streaming is the future, right? So the big writing staffs of 10 to 12 people, it's only going to be reserved for only a few shows at this point. But how can we make this new model still work for writers, you know, today? Like, how can we make sure those writers who are working in those rooms compensated fairly for the amount of work that they end up doing, which is a lot of work? And then how do we open up the budgets of those shows so they can hire more writers? And that's sort of what the patterns of demands are asking, and that's sort of what we're trying to fight for in this negotiation, is really the future of the Guild. I mean, the future of writing as a career here in America. So that's, you know, I mean, it's weird. It feels like a really important fight. You know, it gets bigger and bigger as we get closer to the contract negotiation deadline. It feels like it's getting more and more important. But I think we're always fighting on every contract negotiation. We're always fighting something, but this feels like it's a really, really big deal, because it really is trying to just save the career of writing as a career, honestly.
So it's more than. Go ahead, Kat.
Oh, I was just going to ask, do you feel, and obviously this is a different section of Hollywood, but do you feel like a year ago, ITSE also was going to have a strike, and then that was for crew members? Do you feel like it's similar issues, different issues?
I think there was some overlap. As someone who used to be support staff, I missed the joining IATSE as a writer's assistant or a support staffer in a room. And it was one of those things where IATSE in particular, there's a huge swath, because it's not just production, it's not just support staff. I think there are other jobs and heads that fall under IATSE. And it's like, if they had a strike, everything would have shut down.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything. And, for support staffers, like, I remember when I first started breaking in, like, it was rare for a writer's assistant to also do the script coordinator job. By the time I started doing that job, I got lucky that I only had to do my one job. But I'd say the majority of my friends at that time were doing both jobs. And it's gotten to the point now, because of Zoom, where there is no writer's PA. So there is no additional person to kind of help and cover when someone gets sick, when there's some other family emergency. Right. And now that extra person, their cost, like how much they cost on a budget line, that hasn't been given to the writer's assistant or script coordinator. All of a sudden, their job cost did not increase. They didn't get a pay raise, because now all of a sudden they're doing the job of another person. Like they might have gotten a tiny bump, but not double salary, which is what they should have gotten, because that's what they were doing. They were doing the job of two people versus one. And it's almost a cousin to what we're talking about, because you have all these upper level writers and showrunners doing the job of multiple writers versus just doing their one job as one writer on a show.
So how does this look as like a domino effect within the industry? Because I've seen reports that if this contract does not get renewed and there are strikes, that I think SAG-AFTRA is coming up too this year, and they're gonna support you guys. And so this is just the potential for a domino effect in the whole industry should the contract not get negotiated and should a strike actually happen. Like, what are we looking at for this summer? And again, this is all, we all hope everything goes great. The whole goal is everything goes great.
Yes. I'm trying to put out there's a somehow everyone comes to the table and they're like, yes, let's just find a compromise. But before even SAG-AFTRA, the DGA, their contract's up June 1st, and they usually negotiate 5 months before their contract expires. And this time they sat down and were not able to come to an agreement. So the DGA walked away from their table, and they're coming back next month. And that will play a larger role, I'd say, in some ways, if not the same level. Like, what happens with us on May 1st, and then what happens with the DGA later that same month? Like, there is a world where we stand united. And I think if that happens, I see a world where everything gets resolved much quicker. Because if you can't have a director shoot stuff, both film and TV, and you have no one writing, there is no content being made.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like the different guilds have different interests, right? And we make money in different ways. But you know, the theme is the same in the sense that like the streamers and the studios are really keep constantly trying to cut corners. They certainly don't, especially in streaming, don't pay residuals the way they should, which is I think is hurting a lot of writers. And I know it's starting to hurt directors, which is, I think, one of the things that they're getting angry about. And finally, SAG seems to be right. I mean, it seems to be one of the things that their rallying cry. It does feel like the one thing that everyone can get behind is the fact that like no one is getting what their residuals they think the residuals are worth. So I think that'll be interesting. I think it'll be interesting once, you know, if we do happen to go on strike, you know, how the DGA negotiations will be affected by that actually, and how it, and vice versa, like how their negotiations will affect the length of our strike or whatnot. I mean, I think it'll be interesting.
Just
I
for the listener,
clarify something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just the yes and because I feel like you guys hear the words residuals, people hear certain things, and I'm not quite sure. I was gonna say, just to quantify, like I have a friend who cut her teeth on ER. Her residuals checks that she's getting, because that went into syndication, and there's a lot of ways that she can get residuals. It can license and stream so many ways. Her residual checks are still pretty healthy. The show I worked on, the little Still Star Cross show that I absolutely love and adore, and that staff was just, I loved working with all those people. My last residual check was for $2.63.
Right.
Wow.
That show premiered on ABC in 2017.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
And people used to live on their residuals. Like, I haven't worked in a year. People used to be able to get a residual check and live on that residual check all year or part of the year, because they knew they'd get another one usually in the next quarter or the quarter afterward. And yes, it'd be smaller. But my residual checks for that show have never been substantial enough where I could live on them.
Yeah.
Right.
And my other CBS show that premiered that same summer, those residual checks are down to like $200.
Right.
Again, we're talking network television.
Yeah, these are places that make more than $200 worth of a check. Like, that's, you get $2, that's what, a quarter of a Starbucks latte in Los Angeles? That's
not even
Starbucks.
Also,
Yeah.
And you know what's crazy?
Water, maybe small lemonade. I don't know.
What's even crazier, Christina, I mean, I don't know, because October Faction was a Netflix show, right? I mean, I don't even know what your residuals on that. I mean, like pennies probably? Or what are they?
Here's where October Faction gets its own special snowflake asterisk, is that show was a Canadian production. And so Canada doesn't have residuals. So I had to write and sign a waiver so that I could even work on the show.
So you get paid
up front.
And so what you do, what happens instead, because I am a Writers Guild of America writer, you get a check. And that check is an estimate of how much they guess you would have gotten for residuals.
They estimate.
That check, I will tell you, like, paid off the rest of my student loans.
I was going to say.
But here's the thing. You get one. And I've done bigger checks working on The Flash. Right. So it's not a big check. I've been paying off my student loans for quite some time.
Right.
And I was just like, I'm just going to bite the bullet and have this, like, the money is
right.
I don't know when I'll have that much money ever again for the rest of my life. Right. Let me just do this so I am out of debt for now. And I mean,
that's great. I mean,
this is where I will never see another penny from that show.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is like, I don't know how the DGA residuals work. I wish I did. And SAG, I don't either in regards to streaming, but I know with the Writers Guild, and I had to look this up the other day because one of my team members asked me, their captain, like, what is the deal with residuals? And the deal with residuals and streaming, and Christina, please correct me if you think this is wrong. They're flat rate residuals. So in the sense that, like, everyone gets the same, every show gets the same. Like, for example, the people on Stranger Things don't see any more money than someone like Ray Utarnachitt's one season show or whatever. Like, it's the same amount.
Here's the thing: I could have swore, and again, I've only worked on one streaming show, and that was pre-2020. I feel like pre-COVID, that was like almost another lifetime of television.
Right.
BC, before COVID.
Yes.
The features are different. Features work differently.
But I remember a writer telling me that she worked on multiple streaming shows and her residuals were drastically different based on what the showrunner negotiated for that show. And so it's like, it's kind of, and again, this is where it's like, I don't know this for empirical fact. So this is just me telling you a story that I was told by another writer.
Right.
But
no, I think you're right.
You can kind of make it up as they go along. and
well, I'm talking about, like, if you look at the minimum in the NBA, there is a minimum that that the streamers can get. And you're right. I mean, there may be a version where the showrunner can negotiate a higher rate for their staff, but it's not like it is in in broadcast, like your friend who works in an ER, I mean, the reason why ER residuals are so high is because that stuff plays all over the world. It plays 24 hours a day. It's based on viewership. It is based on whereas in streaming, it is not based on viewership. It is really, they give you like, this is how much you make for, this first year, this is how much you make for this second year. And it actually goes down from there. Which is, I think, something we had tried to address in the 2020 negotiations from, I believe, but it all went out the window because of
the last
COVID.
2020 meeting that I went to. I learned a term called vertical integration. And it's because back then, the whole Fox falling under the Disney umbrella, we were just starting to see what that vertical integration actually was going to look like. And now with Discovery by Warner Brothers and all this, that, and the other, we are seeing where instead of the streaming versus network model and all the other kit and caboodles you have for options, like we're getting back to just the four, where if you're not working for one of the four, you're working for a cousin that falls underneath the umbrella of one of the four.
Right. And
I mean, this is where they just started talking about investigating that Discovery purchase. And it's just like, part of me is like,
now you should
all of them recently.
Also, why didn't you do it before? We all knew it was fishy, but now you guys think it's fishy.
Right.
I don't know. Anyway,
they're changing their streaming name already, so maybe it's too late. They're changing the name.
Max.
Why drop HBO? Like, I'm sorry, it's not.
I'm
TV,
so confused.
HBO, that branding, like. What's happening to HBO? Like, inquiring minds.
Not TV, it's Max now. So,
well, what happened to HBO? It doesn't just gonna go away. So
you're right. Where did it go? Yeah, where's it go?
I don't.
Alternate universes.
So many good questions.
Alternate universe.
It happens. Who knows?
Box office. Hello.
I'm kind of interested in like how similar or different this is to that like 2007 writer strike or that period of time. Because obviously it feels like looking back at the world of like TV in 2007 was like a different generation.
Yeah. I mean, mainly really, there were just a lot more broadcast shows back then and not as many streaming shows. And I think what we heard the other day was at least half our membership is working in streaming now, right? If not a little bit more than half. So yeah, I mean, that just means that like the way, the sort of like unfair practices that the streamers have are affecting that many more members. Back then maybe it was like a minority of the membership, and now it's at least half the membership that the guild is suffering through, which is, I think, is why it's, I mean, it's not that like back then people were not saying that these things were unfair, or even in 2017. It's just that like as more and more members get affected by streaming, the complaints get louder, because that's how the patterns of demands gets formed. It is a poll, literally, like a questionnaire, right, Christina?
Yes.
I mean, we get a questionnaire from the guild, and they ask us like, tell us what is bothering you. It's essentially, what is bothering you today?
What's
like,
wrong? Tell us what's wrong.
And from that sort of from that questionnaire, they were like, this is what you guys have told us. So a lot of times, like, I'll get members who are like, I don't understand, like, why are we talking about this and why are we not talking about that? And I'm like, well, look, they didn't just come up with this. This is the membership. You guys came up with this. So, so I think that's why the main difference really is that so many more writers are working in streaming now than they were in 2007. I think even in 2007, I think the main one of the main things they were fighting for was DVD residuals, which is like nobody even buys DVDs anymore. So
it's it's just very interesting to me, like what you're talking about, how it makes it very difficult for new members of the writing community to even get into the business and really make those connections, because the three of us know individuals in that position, and that hits home for a lot of us. And I really appreciate that is something that is being taken into consideration, and that you explained that, because that puts a whole new spin and perspective on how critical these negotiations are.
Well, and for like my team, the majority of my members on my team are lower level writers. So it's gotten to the point now where getting your first job isn't as hard as getting your second job, which is crazy.
Interesting.
It's crazy that getting your second job is harder than getting that first job because you're not just competing with the new people coming in, you're competing with the people last year who also had that first job and the people from 2 years ago who also had that first job who then didn't get a second job last. Like it winds up being a competition where it's like so hard to get that second job because you're competing with so many more people.
Right.
And how, I was going to ask, how's your, in particular, day-to-day affected by everything that's going on in television? I know everything's ebbing and flowing and all the conversations we've been having, but also the CW. I mean, in particular, if you guys wanted to chat about that, but like obviously you both worked on CW shows and things have been changing there. Like how's your day-to-day at your level changing?
I mean, really the day-to-day is that there's just less jobs, right? I mean, there's less jobs to go out for. And then when, there used to be, staffing season when it was mainly broadcast, and I know we all had our own complaints about staffing season in general, because that also was not a perfect system. But it was sort of like, I think it was like being like placement day. Like I think when you're like a doctor and you get placed, like when you get placed at a hospital, it's like there was like matching day, right? There's like
the sorting hat from Harry Potter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And there were like 30 shows, and like there were like and hey, maybe I'm gonna go over here, maybe I'm gonna go over there. And now it's like you hear of like one show a month, right, Christina? And it's like, and everyone is like, oh my God. And you're sending, everyone is agent is like, and then it disappears like in a second, because really they're only looking to hire 2 writers. And then you wait another month, and then the next month is another show. And then and then it kind of goes like that. Every day it's like you're just waiting to hear. And so there's just less jobs available. I mean, it's weird. It's weird. It's weird. It's a little bit of a ghost town sometimes, right? I mean, it's just weird. I mean,
I was just gonna say, and right now, because of the NBA, like I remember, this is where it's like we've all known about the NBA coming up. Like I knew this was going to be an important negotiation. I became a captain in 2019, and I was like, okay, I'm really gonna like go all out. I'm gonna be the best captain ever. Like I'm gonna go to every meeting, and I did. And it was just kind of like I remember going into the 2020 being like, okay, this shit is real. United, because this whole ATA thing, and when that didn't happen, it was just kind of like, okay, I just need to hunker down, not get COVID, not die, do my job, Zoom. Try and take naps because I'm mentally exhausted because of everything that's going on in the world and the pandemic and a job. And then as it does, now we all have been vaxxed and everything like that. And coming into this, we still knew that this was happening. So I remember like back in the fall and winter time, everyone was like, there's going to be a big push in January. In January, there's going to be so many jobs.
Right, because the contracts are up and people are going to want to like get shows going, right?
Interesting.
I knew 2 female writers of color who got staffed between January and March. 2.
Wow.
Right.
I know a lot of writers not working right
now.
Right. So much for that big influx of shows.
Yeah.
Never happened.
Right.
Never happened.
Right. Never happened. So
just from like an actual like I am also part of a union, and so like from like an actual contract point of view, are you asking then for more budget for a writer's room, thus you may hire 5 to 6 writers instead of the 2 to 3? Is that essentially what's kind of hoping to be written in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a version of that. I mean, I think overall, like as usual, residuals is back on the table. And that feels as complicated. There's so many complicated issues. I almost feel like that's kind of an easy one for them to kind of give us, I feel, but who knows? But yeah, I mean, some of it is like, if you're working, when you're working, that you're making more money, quite frankly, just so because of the length of time in between shows. And there is, there is a proposal to try to get them to hire more writers based on the size of the budget of the show, or of the budget of the writer's room. I think, Christina, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
if I remember correctly, it has to do more with is it a mini room or is it an actual like greenlit room,
real room
pilot? Like I think all of those smaller factors will dictate a little bit more of like how many writers I like how many writers should be in this room? And then also like, if it is a mini room and you hire like 4 writers, and I'm making these numbers up, please do not quote me. But if you hire 4 writers and then the show winds up going and getting a green light, but you decide not to keep like all but one, those other 3 writers need to get compensated because they helped create the foundation of the success of the show.
Right.
And so there's all these proposals to try and like make writers whole, so that if you do take a job for a mini room or for a streamer or for even a network that is doing a mini room, and you're going to be fewer weeks, so they're trying to get you more money per week so that your income actually rises in the front half of getting paid versus the residuals, which is the back half. They're trying to find other ways so that writers can actually like increase their income as a whole. Because honestly, because there are fewer jobs, it feels like right now, especially right now, it's like, okay, I don't have a 9-to-5 job, and I do make money when I'm working. But if I'm not working and have to live on my savings for a year, I need to be able to live on my savings for a year and not feel like I need to eat ramen noodles in order to be able to survive.
Right.
So just to sort of start to wrap us up here, what are ways that fans, listeners, members of the industry, how can they help support you in the upcoming weeks?
I mean, I think, what I keep, because I do have members on my team who are, like they're not able to vote because either they fell out of qualification or whatnot. And I'm always saying that, like, thankfully we have social media now, which we didn't. I mean, we had a version of it in 2007, and but like now, like so many writers are on social media and telling their stories, like they did during IATSE. I think we're taking sort of like a nod from what IATSE did. Telling their stories of working on set and all those struggles. And so I'm always saying, like, if you have a social media account, just boost those voices. Like, people are posting these stories, and some of these people like write for your favorite shows. So boost their voices, let everyone know that this is something that like you are getting behind this fight. I don't know, Christina, if you have any other suggestions, you tell your team. But
I also have some members on my team who have they weren't able to vote, therefore they weren't able to participate in the strike authorization vote. But I would say, like, and some people are more socially network savvy. I ebb and flow depending on what's going on everywhere else. But aside from social media, like we will be picketing. I do feel like that is a place where it's like, if you really want to support us, like, come out and support us. It's not saying that you have to do it every day. Like,
100%.
I'll be out there almost every
coffee.
day, especially. Amazing. But come out and support. I mean, I do think this is where, ratings still matter. Eyeballs still matter. And if you get thousands of eyeballs who are and voices saying, like, you know what, we side with the writers and we think you should meet them at the table. I do think the more people who are saying, like, sit down and negotiate with them because they're trying to sit down and negotiate with you. Like, I think that's where I'm still hopeful that something positive can actually still happen before May 1st. But I do think having the community of the industry and our friends and our family all coming with us,
that's great.
That's a united group that I feel myself very gracious and grateful to be a part of.
That's great, Christina, because in 2007, that's what I did. I mean, I was a script coordinator on Psych. I think I was on Psych then in 2007, and I was not a writer. I was not a guild member, but everyone I worked with in the room, they were guild members. They were all walking picket lines, and I would go hang out with them. I would go and carry a sign, and I would walk with them and support them. For all, like, those hours. I mean, it was a lot. It was a great way to kind of support them and actually get to know other writers, get to know other pre-WGA writers, because there were a lot of other people there too in support of it. And it felt really nice to be part of a movement and a fight that I really believed in as someone who wanted to be in the guild one day. So I think that's great, Christina. Yeah. I mean, I think just suggesting that people go out and support us physically, if it comes down to it. I mean, like I'm with Christina. I'm actually quite I'm very hopeful that a deal can be made, because I don't think it's impossible. I think we're not asking for something that is, that's crazy, exorbitant. Exactly. I mean, it really is pretty reasonable. In fact, it's actually less than what we used to make. We just want something, you know what I mean? So I think I'm very hopeful that a deal can be made, but we're ready to strike if we need to, honestly.
So I think that's going to go ahead and wrap up our episode. I'd like to say thank you to Christina and Ray for joining us.
Thank you.
Real fast, we always go around the table to let people know where they can find you online. So Ray, where can people find you online and support your stories and boost your stories?
I am on Twitter. I don't post much, but although lately I've been doing a lot of retweeting because of all the guild stuff, but it's at Ray Utar, at RAYUTAR on Twitter.
And then Christina, what about you?
I honestly haven't been on Twitter lately. I used to do a 2 Cent Tuesday where I used to give advice that had once been given to me to the writers. But I occasionally, I think, it's I ebb and flow. I ebb and flow mostly on Instagram, which is LA Writer in New York, all lowercase, all together. Because, and by New York, it's NY, because I created that literally my very first staffing job, and I was an LA Writer in New York.
That's why. Well, I think I knew that at one point, but I was like, why is it New York? Yeah.
That's why. And I'm one of those people. It's technology doesn't like me to try and change it, so I just am gone with it. And if I am hoping to get back into Twitter. I just haven't been able to.
It's really not.
It hasn't been the same,
fun.
And
it's everything that's been with.
You'll see the same 5 tweets for about a day.
Yes.
So.
That's true.
All of my Twitter is exclusively Star Trek right now, and that's it. I see nothing else. It's just Star Trek.
The algorithm is very strange. Yeah.
Yeah, very aggressive. It's did you not want spoilers? Here's some spoilers.
Wait, you like Star Trek? This is all you're going to see from now on.
I was like, oh, gosh. So, Morgan, where can everybody find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter getting the same tweets over and over again, at Mojotastic. And then you can also find me as a co-host on Supergirl Radio.
Kat, what about you?
At Comic Uno, officially not verified anymore.
R.I.P. for your blue check, Kat.
R.I.P. Legacy blue check. But yeah, check out at Comic Uno. I always got Kickstarters going on and comics, so I can read Slice of Life on Webtoon every week, so all good stuff over there.
And you all can find me on Instagram, amy.hypnaroski. Really hard to spell. Just do amy.hyp. It'll pop right up. You can also find me performing in Macbeth in San Diego coming up in June, which I'm very excited about. Otherwise, for our podcast, you can find us at thelegendaryladiepodcast.com. You can find us, thelegendaryladies@gmail.com. If you have thoughts about this episode, if you have a conversation you want to add in, feedback, if you want to find ways to support these writers, message us, let us know. We will do everything that we can to share your feedback and read it next time on the podcast. You can support us on iTunes. You can also find us on Instagram. We just officially launched The Legendary Ladies. Yes, it's very cool. We're getting our logo all sorted out. We're very excited. And I think that's going to wrap it up. So thank you to all of our legendary listeners. Thank you to our 2 legendary guests, including all of the felines who have joined us.
There's so many.
Did you notice my cat up there earlier?
I did. I was not to laugh because I saw your little black cat going around. I was like, oh, she's got a cutie too.
She has knocked more than one book out of its position now. She just sort of tilted it. Rude. Black cats unite. Yes. But we thank everyone for joining us. If you'd like to see more of these episodes, let us know. But to all of our legendary listeners, thank you for joining us and stay legendary.